the thing that I didn't quite ever get say, but the thing that actually sort of always sort of like forgive us our sins as we forgive others. There's a sort of threat on this. We have to forgive, otherwise we're going to end up a disaster. And sometimes if I think of this, I think, oh God, if I don't do this, I'm in for it, But actually, there's been times in my life when, I have needed to forgive and I have needed to be forgiven. And I know that from those experiences, if I go to somebody and say, look, I've done this and I need you to forgive me. And I can remember this so vividly and this person said, look, Judy, of course I forgive you. And it just took it all away. It no longer it was no longer in my brain. It just stopped it right there and then. And I think when I've forgiven somebody, it has the same effect. It's just no longer preoccupying me. I'm released from it. But when I think that actually the threat is, if I continue to hang on to all that ghastly stuff, I'm going to be preoccupied and it's going to take up far too much of my head in negative ways. Anyway.
So less of a threat and more of an observation of how things are. So if you don't forgive, you're unlikely to be able to receive forgiveness.
That's right. It's not that God is going to, unless we do this, he's not going to play ball with us.
That's right. There's an interesting, and what I was hinting at one stage, reverse, if say, in our marriage, I've been abusive to Anne or something, I can't control her. No, I haven't. Well, as far as I have, and would probably let me know, I think. But then I can't control her, and Christians have done this, tried to control her with my demand for forgiveness. You have to forgive me, even though I was, beating you for years. And that's a very dangerous thing as well. So, and I assure you I haven't. But
not something you can impose on anybody else. You can only offer it yourself.
Yeah. Right.
Which links in well with last week's gospel in terms of the abuse of power in church institutions who have demanded that kind of forgiveness. And
I really like this parable. It's very juicy.
It is. It's good, isn't it? I've enjoyed it too.
I love, Grace, when you brought up at the beginning about the problem with seeing this man as God. I think this is something we really, really need to teach our people, that parables are not allegories.
This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm teaching parables, is to do a thought experiment where, because the parable never says who's supposed to be who. So just like, what if a different character represented God? What if a different character? What if the master who's acting in such an awful way, what if that's us? Who's God in that story then? That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, and that's really valuable. And then there's also the whole thing of maybe actually no one God isn't represented by anyone in that parable. Maybe it's more, the whole when Jesus said, if your child asks you for bread, you wouldn't give them a snake. How much more will God give good things? I think a lot of these parables are, the widow who's pestering the neighbor, and the parable isn't that God is really, really reluctant to give bread to the widow who wants it. It's more, if even this guy who's so reluctant to give bread to the widow will do so, how much more God? And so I would say even this guy who is clearly not good at managing his slaves and is brutal and punishes them, if even he forgave him, then so much more God. And
actually in a family, but the family is the crucible by which we learn our relationships from. And even although my family can behave extraordinarily badly, and they do, they still all stick around, and they still all will sit around a brazier on a Friday night by choice, and roast marshmallows, and the kids will come around as well, so there's the good and bad behavior that goes on within the family, but it's where the family learn that no matter how awful you are, even if you shouldn't, you are forgiven.
I was struggling with the final couple of verses, and the not just the imprisonment, but the torturous imprisonment. So hard. But emotionally, it made a little bit more sense to me, because I caught myself. I've got 3 preschool children, and they can be torturous to me at times. But I'm happy to forgive that, because I just adore them.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
the bit that I find the hardest is when one of my children hurts or harms another of my children. And I have this really quite visceral emotional response of wanting to quickly remove them, but also I find myself wanting to give some sort of vengeance to this child who's committed a harm to this other child, because I love this other child so much, but I also love this child. And I recognize my own kind of vindictive response at the vindictiveness of someone that I regularly forgive. Yeah. So I think when we forgive lots, we find the unforgiveness of others so much harder to deal with. So when I see how much I forgive my kids, how hard it is to not see my kids forgiving each other.